It's fair to say that the last few weeks had not been the best for the PALANITE Enforcer squad, known locally as Sanction Watch Primus. But luckily, Captain Salas was not one to dwell too heavily on the past, instead preferring to look to the future, and the next opportunity to prove to the Watch Commander that his squad was worth the hassle of the occasional bit of extra paperwork. With this in mind, he looked again at the warrant slate for the simple arrest or elimination order issued against a Hive scummer who would be meeting up with a gang of Orlocks in a nearby market. And with a smile, he gave the command for his men to roll out. The Iron Hounds, fresh from their victory over the Saar gang and the days of drinking and debauchery that followed, have been contacted by a potential customer who is looking to secure safe passage through the lower levels of the sump. Not one to turn down the chance at some easy creds, Jax Grendel arranges to meet with their prospective client, choosing a local underhive market as the perfect place to get down to some negotiations. With a handful of the gang acting as protection and the rest scoping out a nearby dock, Jax makes his way to the meet, the tech trinket hanging around his neck seeming to heat up slightly with every step. Sanction Watch Primus's main objective is to capture or kill the Hive scum their reports say is looking to hire the Iron Hounds. A secondary objective is the capture or elimination of members of the ORLOCK gang's leadership, with the aim of significantly weakening their influence in the sector. From the Iron Hounds' perspective, their main aim is to ensure the safe exfiltration of their client by any means necessary by getting them to the sump docks located across from the underhive market. Sanction Watch Primus will deploy into the areas surrounding the two transit doorways on either side of the underhive market. They will deploy their full gang prior to the start of the battle, and may split them between the two deployment zones as they see fit. As for the Iron Hounds, they will be deployed within the underhive market itself, though only a portion of their gang will be in attendance, with the remainder available as reinforcements that can deploy from either of the two sump dock gates. As the attacker, Sanction Watch Primus will automatically receive priority in the first turn as they initiate the ambush. Splitting their gang into two equal teams of 3, Sanction Watch Primus aim to quickly secure the routes out of the market in the hopes of ending the battle quickly, before any reinforcements can arrive to support the Orlocks. With the Iron Hounds leader negotiating with their prospective client, the remaining members of the gang take up positions covering the main routes in and out of the market, keeping their eyes open for any signs of potential trouble. Moving as quietly as possible, Scott works his way along the walkway and into a position where he's able to draw a bead on one of the Orlock lookouts stationed at the edge of the market. Raising his grenade launcher, he gives the rest of the squad a warning over the comms before pulling the trigger, watching with satisfaction as the grenade arcs perfectly over an intervening barricade and takes the ganger cleanly, sending him sprawling to the floor, shrapnel piercing his armor and ripping into the soft flesh beneath. With the sound of the sudden explosion still ringing in his ears, Joe Dillon ignores the prone form of Zeke, sprawled to his left, and moves towards the edge of the market, his auto gun up and scanning for the source of the attack. With the smoke clearing, he easily spots the brutish form of the Enforcer, and without missing a beat, he levels his weapon and takes the shot, hitting the man square in the chest. Unfortunately, the thick armor worn by the lickspittle lackey holds, and Dillon has to be content with knocking him from his feet. As the crack of gunfire and the sounds of explosions start to fill the air, Captain Salas gives the order for the squad to begin closing the trap before climbing his way up onto the walkway above. Moving quickly along the rust-marked grating, he readies his concussion carbine, keen to get into a position to provide covering fire to his men as they push forwards with the aim of capturing, or if necessary terminating, the target of their warrant. Sparing only a second to deliver a glare of annoyance to the gang leader, the client ducks his head and scrambles his way over to a wall at the edge of the market, letting out a string of profanities as the Orlocks move quickly to respond to the sudden outbreak of hostilities. With a quick acknowledgement of the captain's orders, Branwyn crosses from his current position to a collection of crates and barrels that offers him a clean shot at one of the gangers they've been tasked with neutralizing. Raising his trusty Enforcer pattern shotgun, Branwyn fires off a burst of salvo rounds, with at least one round hitting and causing a vicious-looking wound that sends the man stumbling backwards before collapsing to the ground in a bloodied mess. Biting down on the rage flaring within him at the sight of Thorson being blown from his feet, Jackson Crow scrabbles through the market stall and into a position to return fire on the enforcer who just shot his friend. As usual, a sense of calmness rushes in to replace his anger as he pulls his shotgun into his shoulder and fires. His skill and familiarity with the weapon easily overcomes the relatively long range to the target, as well as any benefit they'd get from cover. His shots hit home with an audible crunch, wounding the enforcer, their armor failing to stop the damage, which results in the man folding like a cheap deck chair, his involvement in the fight over in an instant. Keen not to miss out on the action, Sergeant Eves gives his bolter a quick check as he strides forwards, getting himself into a position where he can draw a bead on one of the Orlok gangers in the center of the market. Taking aim, he lets out a slow breath and fires. And while the target is at long range, they're standing in the open, making it a relatively easy shot, and he feels a sense of grim satisfaction as a round slams into the ganger, blowing through his armor and sending sprays of crimson blood into the air as he cries out and collapses to the deck. Hissing through clenched teeth at the pain radiating from the wound in his back, Jax Grendel pushes himself to his feet, fighting down a sudden urge to lash out violently at anyone within reach. A quick shake of his head manages to clear his thoughts, and he looks around for the client, spotting him taking cover against a wall near one of the market stalls. Rushing over to him, Jax is determined to get the man clear of this mess and on his way to his destination as soon as possible. With Eves advancing down the right, Solomon decides to swing to the left, aiming to get himself into a position where he can intercept any of their targets trying to make a break from the market in that direction. Sprawled on the floor with blood oozing from shrapnel wounds, Zeke Hammerstein does his best to simply stay conscious, hoping that someone will be able to offer him help, even in the midst of the ongoing firefight. Though less aggressive than his fellow sergeant, Cauldron was no less deadly with his enforcer bolter, and with steady assuredness, he settles his weapon on the steel barricade, using it as a rest as he aims at the Orlok ganger sheltering behind heavy cover. With a smooth pull of the trigger, he sends a burst of rounds thundering into his target, and even despite the range and difficulty of the shot, at least one manages to wound the man, blasting through his armor and spinning him to the floor, though Cauldron is unsure if the Orlok is only winged or put down for good. Like Zeke Hammerstein, Carl Thorson finds himself struggling to remain aware of his surroundings, the painful wound in his chest attempting to send him into unconsciousness with each labored breath. With the opening exchanges of the battle perfectly demonstrating the brutal nature of underhive conflict, fully 2/3 of the Iron Hounds have suffered some form of injury, while Sanction Watch Primus have already seen Patrolman Branwyn taken out of the fight. Despite this, neither gang has their resolve broken, with both stubbornly determined to continue. With Joe Dillon no longer able to offer help, Zeke Hammerstein is forced to try dealing with his wounds on his own, a situation that unfortunately doesn't go to plan, and he feels himself weakening as his blood continues to leak from shrapnel wounds peppering his body. As for Carl Thorson, even though Jackson Crow is on hand to offer support, his wounds prove more difficult to deal with than expected, though thankfully, they manage to do just enough to stop his situation from getting any worse. Continuing along the upper walkway, Captain Salas reaches a point where he can get a look at the situation unfolding below him. Almost at once, he spots their target hunkering down against a wall with a vicious-looking ganger, most likely the leader, crouching down next to him. Seeing a chance to bring a quick end to this conflict, Salas levels his concussion carbine at the target, ignoring the easier shot the ganger represents, and lets loose. The shot hits its mark, and the explosive blast catches both men, sending them crashing to the ground, though it looks like only the target suffers any lasting damage. Slate Lander rushes through the south gate to the unmistakable sound of distant conflict. Ahead of him, he spots an enforcer waiting in ambush behind a tall barricade. Sick of these slop-brained morons sticking their noses into Iron Hounds' business, Lander swings his shotgun towards the unsuspecting lawman and fires. His aim is spot on, and the salvo round crunches into his target's back, but unfortunately, it's turned aside by the man's armor, though the impact still blows him from his feet. To make matters worse, Lander hears the telltale sound of his gun jamming, and cursing violently, he struggles to clear it, but to no avail. Pissed at watching the ganger he'd sent to the deck get up and stumble away, Eve sprints forwards, getting himself into cover at the edge of a wall, and in position to unleash hell on the scum-sucking Orlocks. Having ducked instinctively as the blast of concussive force leveled both the boss and their client, Jackson Crow mutters a string of expletives as he moves out of the market, scanning around for the source of the attack. Glancing up, he spots an enforcer positioned on the upper walkway, a concussion carbine raised and pointed in their direction. Without hesitating, Crow fires off a burst and watches in satisfaction as the enforcer is struck multiple times, wounding him as his armor fails, the force of the impact stumbling him back until, with a cry of anguish, he topples from sight, the distant sound of his body impacting the ground, letting Crow know he won't be seeing that enforcer again anytime soon. Scott pushes himself back to his feet just in time to see Captain Salas get blasted from a walkway by the Orlock bastard now standing in the open before him. With a cry of rage, Scott fires a frag grenade towards the offending lowlife, and though his aim is slightly off, the blast still manages to catch his intended target, knocking the man prone, though it looks to Scott like the ganger somehow manages to avoid taking any real damage. Keen to try out his new toy, Duster Laszlo rushes from the east gate and towards a raised platform ahead of him, his new suspensor rig making lugging his heavy stubber no more difficult than if he was carrying an autogun, and he can't help but grin at the thought of being able to wield the weapon with this newfound freedom. Staggering back to his feet after taking an unexpected and unwelcome shot to the back, Solomon decides that discretion might just be the better part of valor, and without waiting around to be shot at again, turns and stumbles back into a position where he can take a moment to regain his composure safely out of the line of fire. Biting down on the pain radiating from his freshly taken wounds, Joe Dillon pulls himself back to his feet with a grunt. Ahead of him, he spots the enforcer he'd shot earlier also back on his feet and firing his grenade launcher. Calling out to the bootlicking dumbass, Dillon levels his auto gun and fires, and just like before, he scores a solid hit. But once more he watches in growing frustration as the round is stopped by the man's thick armor, the only saving grace being that the impact yet again forces him to drop down to the deck. Realizing that there was a strong likelihood that the gangers and their target might manage to break out from the market, Cauldron makes the split-second decision to tactically reposition himself so he could be well-placed to counter any push made by the Orlocks. And it was just a happy coincidence that doing so took him out of the potential line of fire of the heavy stubber-wielding thug he'd just seen rushing from the sump dock. Bruised, bloodied, and groggy from the concussive blast that had just slammed into him, the client scrambles shakily to his feet, and wondering why he even bothered to get out of bed this morning, pushes his unsteady legs to carry him out of the market and towards the cover of a set of stairs ahead of him. Sitting up and blinking furiously to clear the double vision swimming in front of his eyes from the impact of his head having slammed into the hard rockery wall, Jax watches his client stumble away and, spitting out a litany of profanities, clambers to his feet and follows, the techno trinket starting to feel warm against his chest as his feet crunch through the dust and detritus littering the ground. In spite of the carnage unfolding around them, Thorson and Hammerstein's worlds contract down to simply focusing on ensuring each breath is followed by the next, as they both fight to remain conscious, in the hopes that they can either find the strength to carry on, or someone will take a moment to offer them a helping hand. As both gangs continue to dish out brutal levels of punishment, every member of the Iron Hounds initially involved has suffered at least one hit, while Captain Salas has yet again been taken out by a low-life scumbag, though thankfully without taking any lasting damage. But even with two members of their squad already out of the fight and reinforcements starting to arrive, Sanction Watch Primus refuses to pull back, while the Iron Hounds, despite the battering they've already taken, hold firm in their resolve. With the firefight continuing to rage all around him, Zeke Hammerstein yet again tries to stem the blood flowing from his various wounds. Thankfully, Joe Dillon, who is back on his feet, manages to offer him some much-needed support, and with his friend's help, Zeke is able to wrap up his injuries, at least well enough that he can get himself back in the fight. Despite the desperation starting to eat away at his resolve, Carl Thorson manages to calm himself long enough to pull out a pack of gut glue and dump it messily onto his wound, gritting his teeth against the pain as the chemicals do their work, eventually stopping the bleeding, and Thorson lets out a sigh of relief as he readies himself to get back to his feet. Stepping out from behind the edge of the wall, Eve sees the Orlok he'd previously shot, and ignoring the groaning form of the ganger at his feet, raises his bolter and fires at the scumbag, who stubbornly refuses to do the decent thing and stop getting up. Eves has no trouble landing a hit, wounding the Orlok and blowing through his armor. With a shout of pain, the ganger sprawls to the deck, injured but plainly still in the fight, and Eves lets out a frustrated string of expletives, wondering what the hell he has to do to actually take this man out. The client glances to his right, just in time to see the Orlok leader take a clean hit from an enforcer bolt round, flinching as hot blood splashes across his face as the ganger collapses at his feet. Deciding that hanging around would definitely not be good for his health, the client breaks into a run, rounding the stairs and rushing to his left, heading down a corridor and away from the utter mayhem breaking out in all directions. Cauldron watches with cool satisfaction as the target makes a break from the protection of the Orlok gangers, exactly as he had hoped. Sending a quick update across the squad comms, he moves forward into a position where he can line up a clean shot, and taking a second to focus, raises his bolter and pulls the trigger, fully expecting to see the target crumple to the ground. But just as he feels a round fire, his foot slips in the rubble, and unbelievably, his shot goes wide of the mark, leaving Cauldron to stare dumbfoundedly at the retreating back of the target. Coming to the conclusion that he was decidedly fed up with being blasted from his feet by these asshole enforcers, Crow stands up and glances around, quickly spotting one of the lawmen standing over the still prone form of Thorson. Pulling his shotgun up, he levels it at the man and pulls the trigger, a burst of solid rounds ripping toward the target, slamming into the enforcer and crashing him off his feet. Despite the clean hits that should have, in Crow's opinion, cut the bastard in half, the effects seem to be somewhat limited by the man's armor, which somehow managed to absorb the hits, much to Crow's annoyance. With an unnatural sense of déjà vu, Scott once again clambers back to his feet, his armor saving him from the worst of another hit from a ganger's auto gun. In a repeat of what happened only moments before, he sees the Orlok ganger with the shotgun firing back into the market, and with a sigh, he aims his launcher and fires another frag grenade towards him. Just like last time, his aim is off, but the blast still catches his target. But unlike before, the man is not sent sprawling, though he is forced to duck away from the blast, avoiding the worst of the shrapnel in the process. For the third time in as many minutes, Jax Grendel finds himself painfully staggering back to his feet, another wound crying out for his attention as the world slowly swims back into focus. Hoping the client has managed to find somewhere out of the line of fire, Jax moves groggily forwards, getting himself into cover behind a set of crates and barrels, his gaze settling on an enforcer ahead of him, as an ever-growing sense of rage eats away at his quickly deteriorating resolve. Hearing Sergeant Cauldron's update over the comms, Solomon knows that the only way he can help the squad, and possibly stop the target from escaping, is to make a run for the central platform. With that decided, he takes a deep breath and sprints from his place of safety, rushing towards the stairs leading to the platform and bounding up them, with barely a thought for the Orlok ganger he knows is somewhere behind him. Swinging around the corner of the structure he'd been using for cover, Duster Laszlo's gaze swiftly locks onto the bolter-wielding enforcer below him, and with his heavy stubber easily gliding into position on its suspensor rig, he lines up his shot and releases a storm of rounds towards the exposed target. Several of the shots find their mark, with at least a few causing wounds that the enforcer's armor fails to stop, spinning the man from his feet in a spray of blood, though despite the obvious damage, Laszlo isn't convinced it'll be enough to keep the bastard down and out of the fight. Hoping to the Emperor that third time really is the charm, Joe Dillon lines up yet another shot at the enforcer ahead of him, even taking the time to carefully aim, in order to make sure that he puts the man down for good. It's one of the easiest shots Dylan has ever faced, but despite this, and the extra effort spent lining everything up, he somehow manages to miss the mark, a rapid and lengthy set of profanities spilling from his lips as he glares down at his gun, and then up at the heavens. With blood having finally stopped pissing from his wounds, Carl Thorson looks at the prone form of the enforcer before him and, spitting out a mouthful of claret, hauls himself to his feet. Pulling out his twin set of stub guns, he points them towards the man and pulls the triggers, blasting away with both at point-blank range. Even in his current state, the rounds slam into his target, but without much impact, as most of the shots are absorbed by the man's armor or simply fail to cause any significant damage. Thanks to Dylan's help, Zeke Hammerstein is finally able to get himself back into the fight, and with a grunt of pain, he clambers to his feet before moving back and into the cover offered by one of the market stall's gun racks. Slate Lander watches with growing frustration as the enforcer rushes past him and up onto the central platform. Cursing under his breath, he once again works the slide on his shotgun, but as before, the jam fails to clear. And biting down a scream of annoyance, he instead moves from behind the barrier and towards the stairs, taking up position behind a set of crates, all the while continuing to work furiously on his jammed weapon. Moving out from the east gate, Boomer Coulson takes a moment to assess the situation before raising his autogun and settling his aim on the distant figure of the enforcer atop the central platform. Squeezing the trigger, he fires off a short burst, landing at least one hit, though unfortunately it fails to cause any meaningful damage to the target, only winging him and sending him scrambling to the deck. With reinforcements continuing to arrive and two of their members already out, Sanction Watch Primus find themselves facing a numerical disadvantage that has shifted the momentum of the engagement firmly in the direction of the Iron Hounds, who, while still battered and bruised, have worked their way into what appears to be a winning position. Despite this, the enforcers refuse to buckle under the pressure and continue to fight, even as their chances of completing their mission seem vanishingly thin. With Sergeant Cauldron's warning that the target had made a break for it, Scott pulls his attention away from the ongoing firefight around the market and shifts position back along the walkway to a spot where he can draw a clear bead on the fleeing mark. Just as he's about to pull the trigger, he catches a flash of movement to his right, and as he glances over, his gaze locks onto the muzzle of the heavy stubber swinging in his direction. Without thinking, he switches his aim and fires, sending a frag grenade arcing toward the new threat as his weapon cycles empty. Yet again, his hurried shot misses, but not by enough to avoid hitting the ganger, who cries out in pain as his armor fails to protect him from a spray of shrapnel that peppers his form. With rounds flying past him and the sound of grenades exploding behind, the client continues his rush towards the east gate of the sump docks, a grim smile pulling at his lips as he rounds the corner and sprints up to an Orlok ganger spraying bullets towards what he assumes is another member of the damnable enforcer squad. Solomon desperately scrambles back to his feet as he watches the target sprint towards the open gate, knowing full well that if he makes it inside, the chances of them apprehending their mark would be vanishingly thin. Pulling his shotgun tightly to his shoulder, he ignores the Orlocks around him and aims directly for the fleeing man, firing at full range and with barely any of his target visible, simply praying to the Emperor that despite the difficulties, his aim would hold true. This time, though, it seems that the Emperor was busy elsewhere as the round slams harmlessly against the hard rockcrete of the gate pillar, doing nothing more than chipping its surface as the target passes through the gate and beyond his reach. It wasn't often that Laszlo was forced to drop to the deck when taking fire, even when suffering an injury or wound in the process, so the fact that he'd been caught off guard by the damn enforcer's sudden decision to switch targets was more than a little infuriating. Pushing himself back to his feet, he glares at the lawman with his punk-ass grenade launcher and lines up on him with his heavy stubber, pulling the trigger and sending a stream of projectiles ripping towards him. The enforcer's body jerks from multiple impacts, more than a few of the rounds piercing his armor, sending him to the deck in a spray of blood, the damage clearly bad enough to suggest he was unlikely to take much more part in the fight. Shaken, bruised, but somehow still unhurt, Eve struggles painfully back to his feet. At this point, he's lost track of how many times he's been hit. But as he stands, his gaze locks on that damn Orlok who, unbelievably, was yet again on his feet. Fury and frustration spikes within him, and ignoring everything else, he stubbornly takes aim at the distant figure. But before he can pull the trigger, another Orlok steps into his view, pistols raised and aimed directly at him. Despite his almost pathological desire to end the Orlok, who simply refuses to stay dead, Eves reluctantly turns his bolter on the closer target, letting loose a short burst that causes horrific damage and sends the ganger crashing to the ground, his head cracking against the rusted steel with an audible crunch. Utterly fed up of being shot at by that damn grenade launcher, Crow stands up and looks around for the enforcer responsible, but to his annoyance, the asshole is nowhere in sight. The sound of bolt rounds detonating pulls his attention back to the market, where he sees the man he'd previously shot standing over the bloodied form of Thorson. Pissed off at the entire situation, Crow lines up on the enforcer and unloads his shotgun, the burst of solid slugs catching him squarely, a spray of blood erupting from his side, as his armor finally fails to soak up the damage. With grim satisfaction, Crow watches the lawman crumple to his knees, sure that, even if he wasn't out of the fight, he was unlikely to cause him any further trouble. Pushing himself back to his feet, the realization that their mission was a failure hits Cauldron like a brick to the face. Having watched their target disappear from sight, his attention turns instead to making sure that the Orlok scum pay for their interference. Seeing the bloodied form of what he assumes is their leader stumbling towards him, Cauldron calmly raises his bolter. The deep crump of his weapon firing fills the air, and he watches with no small amount of pleasure as the rounds slam into his target, catching him cleanly, and at least one shredding his armor to send him spinning from his feet in a spray of crimson blood. Seeing the enforcer get back to his feet and fire, Slate Lander desperately continues working to clear his jammed weapon until, with a final click, the defective round flies free, a wave of sudden relief washing over him as he rapidly sets about reloading the shotgun. Looking back, he's thankful to see that the enforcer is still on the platform, and Lander rushes to raise his weapon and finally fires. And manages to put his shots cleanly into the wall, instead of his damn target. Standing at the south gate, Harlan O'Donnell comes to the realization that he'd be better able to help the rest of the Iron Hounds by heading back into the sump dock and making his way towards the east gate, where he'll be able to offer support to Boomer Coulson and help protect their client. As the client slips past him, Boomer Coulson continues to lay down a punishing stream of fire towards the enforcer located on the central platform. As the enemy attempts to get off a shot against the disappearing form of the client, he presents a clear target, and Coulson focuses his fire, watching as a number of shots slam into him, causing solid hits that wound the enforcer. At least one round penetrates as the man's armor eventually fails, inflicting a serious injury that sends him collapsing to the platform, a muffled cry accompanying the thud of his falling body. Turning towards the sounds of the gunfight raging behind him, Joe Dillon is just in time to watch as an enforcer drops to the ground from a flurry of solid slugs slamming into him. Though down, Dillon can clearly see that the lawman isn't yet out of the fight, a situation which he'll be happy to rectify shortly. As he moves forwards, he raises his autogun and fires a volley into the prone figure before him, scoring a number of hits, but failing to cause any noticeable wounds, the rounds impacting the man's armor and drawing low groans of pain, but little else in the way of damage. Watching Dillon fail to put an end to the downed enforcer, Zeke Hammerstein strides towards them, raising his auto pistols and unloading them both into the still groaning lawman. As rounds hammer into the prone form before him, one of Zeke's pistols jams up, but the rapid-firing weapons do their job, wounding the enforcer as his armor splits and splinters under the string of impacts, bloody wounds opening up as the man's body jerks and judders before eventually falling still. Nonchalantly, Zeke takes a moment to clear the jam and then turns to Dillon, who grins back at him with a nod of satisfaction at a job well done. Jax Grendel was no stranger to pain, but he was sure that the punishment he'd taken today was at least somewhere in the top 10 of worst beatings that he'd ever suffered. But something about this situation was different, almost as if the warmth radiating from the techno trinket lying against his chest was smothering most of the searing agony he was sure he should be feeling at this point. But just as he was starting to ponder this thought, it was instantly gone, almost as if it had been plucked from his mind, leaving him instead to focus on the throbbing pain that was all of a sudden back where he expected it to be. As their target passes beyond their reach, and with only a single member of the team still on their feet, Sergeant Cauldron reluctantly gives the order to withdraw, accepting the futility of continuing to fight when faced with such overwhelming odds, leaving the Iron Hounds to claim victory and usher the Hive scum through the gate and into the dock. Despite the brutal exchanges and bloody injuries dealt to both sets of gangs during the engagement, all of those fighters who ended the battle injured were able to recover, with none suffering any lasting damage or serious wounds. As a starting point, each gang member gains 1 point of experience for taking part in the battle. Looking at the Iron Hounds, Jackson Crow once again finds himself earning the most experience by managing to take both Branwyn and Salas out of the fight. Duster Laszlo, Boomer Coulson, and Zeke Hammerstein all pick up points for causing members of Sanction Watch Primus a serious injury, while Dylan earned his extra point by supporting Zeke's successful recovery. As for Sanction Watch Primus, Sergeant Eves and Cauldron both pick up 3 points, the former for taking Carl Thorson down, and the latter for seriously injuring Jax Grendel. Branwyn and Scott also earned themselves an additional point by inflicting serious injuries on members of the Iron Hounds, bringing their total to 2 experience points each by the end of the battle.